Yeah, the next talk is going to be about Canary deployments and blue-green deployments on Kubernetes by folks from Intuit. And I just wanted to see a quick show of hands. How many of you are running Kubernetes in production? All right, great. And do you think you figured out your deployment strategies? Do you have something in place for blue-green deployments or Canary deployments, whatever your needs are? Okay. And who is looking for something in that area? Right. Well, wonderful. So I hope you'll learn something in this talk from Danny Thomson and Alexander Matyushentsev from Intuit, who are going to talk a little bit about what they've did for solving those needs. Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danny. This is my colleague, Alex. And thank you so much for attending our session on how Intuit does Canary and blue-green deployments with a K8s controller. So Alex and I are both software engineers at Intuit. And for the last 6 months, we've been working on Argo Rollouts. And we're really excited to give you a demo of it today. So just a brief overview of the talk today. It's a classic presentation. We'll kind of talk about Intuit and some of the engineering challenges that we have, especially in the context of deployments. Talk about kind of some of the options that we came up with, or at least failed attempts, I should say, and then talk about our final solution, which offers a declarative way to do blue-green and Canary strategies. So to jump into it, so Intuit is a company with a revenue of $6 billion, and we have over 50 million customers. We provide financial and accounting software to our users in order to simplify their lives. To get that software to those users, we have around 4,000 engineers. As a result, this kind of creates there are a lot of different needs that all of these developers have. And in order to help move into the cloud, we really adopted Kubernetes as our underlying platform to deploy into the cloud. So here is our adoption of Kubernetes over the last year. It was initially a little bit of a slow start as we were kind of learning, getting a lot of learnings and building up that muscle memory, but we really started to pick up pace and started to address a bunch of different needs. And as the number of users kind of go up, we've gained a lot more knowledge and have come across a lot more problems. Just some more stats on Intuit in general. We have 4 different business units, and right now we have around 1,200 engineers using Kubernetes out of our 4,000 employees. Some of our fun Kubernetes stats. We got around 120 clusters. Each of those are around 200 to 300 nodes. We want to keep them kind of medium-sized. And then also, we do around 1,300 deploys a day. With those deploys, most of them are using the standard deployment object. As a result, that leaves us with 2 deployment strategies, recreate and rolling update. Most of the engineers are using the rolling update, but that doesn't really solve all the use cases that our developers have. For example, we have some legacy applications that really can't do a rolling update, and then we have more cutting-edge applications that want to do some more interesting strategies. So as a result, we're looking to solve for blue-green strategies, Canary, and A/B testing. And so one of the core principles of our Kubernetes platform is that we really take into account the GitOps methodology. So what is GitOps? It's using Git as a single source of truth of your desired state for your infrastructure and application. So what does that mean? We store all of our Kubernetes manifests in a Git repository, And we use a tool we've developed called Argo, an open source tool we've developed called Argo CD to take those manifests, compare them to what's in the cluster, identify what the differences are, show that to the user, and then kind of reconcile that difference and apply those changes. And so this kind of introduces a problem with the strategies I talked about earlier. How do you do a blue-green or canary deployment while still leveraging GitOps? Since there's no native support for blue-green and canary in Kubernetes, we can't just use an off-the-shelf solution. And there's this kind of conflicting approach to GitOps and blue-green and canary deployments, since GitOps is inherently declarative, where you say, this is the state where I want to go, here's where I am, just get me there, while blue-green and canary are more imperative, where you have a defined list of steps that you want to execute to get to the next step. And so we really wanted more of a declarative approach, and we wanted to kind of integrate this with our CI tools so that our developers could have a simple, clean pipeline from commit to deploy to master. And so we had a problem, and we were thinking, all right, how could we kind of approach this to provide a solution for our users who want to use these different strategies? Our first approach was Jenkins. And it worked. It had a bunch of problems, though. It didn't really fit our model of GitOps because we were taking a lot of state and putting that into our Jenkins pipeline, which meant we had two different sources of truth: your Jenkins pipeline and your Git repository. Additionally, there are a lot of assumptions that our Jenkins pipeline would just assume in order to orchestrate this deployment. So if anything changed, if anything was wrong with the pipe, or wrong with the cluster, or different with the cluster, I should say, not wrong, the pipeline would fail, and if you try to execute again, it'd fail again, and that would require our users to go in and change, or at least modify the cluster to get it back into the right state in order to run their pipeline. And since it was extremely brittle, that wasn't really the solution we were looking for. Additionally, we really don't like putting Kubernetes credentials on Jenkins, and we found that taking that solution and distributing it across multiple pipelines was a lot more work than we'd really like to do. So we took a step back and said, okay, how can we do this better? Well, the next step was trying to push a lot of that logic from the Jenkins pipeline into deployment hooks, executing them before and after the initial Kubernetes apply. But that also still had a lot of those underlying assumptions that we had with our Jenkins. And it really wasn't following the GitOps model that we want to give users, because we didn't have a declarative spec saying this is where we're going. We just said, okay, here are a bunch of steps that you still need to execute. So this worked, but we weren't happy with it. So we took a step back again, and we were like, all right, both of our first two approaches were very imperative. We very much said, do this, do that. Instead, we want to kind of really take advantage of what makes Kubernetes, one of the things that makes Kubernetes so great. It's declarative nature. And so we decided to create a custom resource with a custom controller. With this custom controller, we took these 5 design considerations into account. First, we really wanted to take all of that logic, that deployment orchestration logic, and kind of just package it into the controller so that our developers don't have to worry about the deployment logic. Really, they should be focusing on their application code, and it should be a seamless deployment. Second, we really wanted to make sure it was GitOps friendly, and regardless of the state of the cluster, it should be able to handle that state and get back into a solid, steady state. We wanted it to run inside the Kubernetes cluster so that we didn't have to provide credentials to some outside source in order to orchestrate the deployment. And also, in terms of a migration pattern, we really wanted people who are coming from deployments to have a seamless story to switch to a rollout and not lose any of the functionality that they had with these rollouts. And so with that and 6 months of work, we're really excited to introduce Argo Rollouts. It is our advanced open source K8s deployment controller. It is completely Kubernetes native, and right now it supports blue, green, and canary deployments. So this, thank you. So this is great, but how does it work? Well, Argo Rollouts, we install a custom resource called a rollout, and then we install a controller that operates on that rollout resource. One of the main responsibilities of that controller is to handle the replica set creation, scaling, and deletion. So handle the full life cycle of that replica set. Similar to a deployment, we wanted to have a single desired state as a pod spec. So everyone who's coming from a deployment, they get to leave that .spec.template alone, and they can just use that with the rollout so they could have a seamless transition. We also support both automated and manual promotions. So if a user wants to run some automated tests and then immediately deploy, that's possible. Or if they want to have some more manual tests that they want to run and then give a manual thumbs up, that's also possible. And we wanted to stay in line with the deployment functionality by integrating with existing tools like HPA. So this is still pretty high level, and why don't we kind of dig down into some manifests. So here's a deployment. Nothing special, nothing too exciting, but when we want to change it to a rollout, the first thing we need to do is change the API version in kind to the rollout. Second, we need to add a Argo rollout specific strategy that will kind of orchestrate, or at least define the orchestration you want to do declaratively. There are two currently available, blue-green and canary. So I'll start with blue-green first. So here is the blue-green strategy spec. The first thing I want to point out is the active service and the preview service. These are references to services in the same namespace as the rollout. The active is intended to be used for live production, consumer-facing traffic, while the preview is more meant for kind of testing, like just an endpoint that you can kind of test before you switch it to the active. And so the rollout controller will be responsible for modifying these services to direct traffic to specific replica sets that were created by the rollout. And so in order to do that, similar to a deployment, each replica set has a label with a unique pod hash that we can use to identify that specific replica set. And so when we want to change traffic from one replica set to another, we'll modify the services selector to inject that new pod hash to switch the traffic to the new one. We will do a demo of this in a bit, but we also offer functionality to control the size of the preview environment. So if you want to try to save some resources while you do some testing, and we can do manual and automated promotions. Up next, we have the canary strategy. So the blue-green strategy had a bunch of different knobs to kind of control the behavior of the blue-green deployment. With the canary strategy, we found that different users have very different approaches to canary. And we didn't want to alienate any users when we provide them Argo Rollout, so we tried to make it as flexible as possible. We allow users to define the steps that they want to take to transition from their old version to the new. And so those steps, you can either define a ratio that you would like to achieve, or a ratio you'd like to achieve of traffic to your canary, which is the new version. Or you can have a step that will pause your rollout for either a predetermined time or indefinitely until an external force says that it's okay to progress. And so with this, we don't modify a service. because we want to be able to send traffic to both versions. And at the moment, we don't use a service mesh. We're using just pure the replica count ratio. So we are going to scale both the canary and the stable replica sets to reach the ratio listed in the canary steps. So once that last step is executed, the canary, or at least the rollout, will switch the canary to the stable replica set and do a complete rollout from the old version to the new. This is very similar to a rolling update. So if you don't list any of these steps here, it'll have the same behavior. And so instead of just kind of talking about it on the stage, I think it'd be easier to show a demo. So I'm going to have Alex step in and do a brief demo of Argo Rollouts.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. So as Danny mentioned, my name is Alex, and we are colleagues on Argo project. And today, I'm going to show Rollouts controller in action. So let's get started. So during the demo, I'm going to deploy a very simple application using both Canary and blue-green strategies. And I'm going to just drive the deployment process step by step manually for the sake of the demo. And I will explain how you could automate it. But if I do it manually, I will have a chance to explain exactly what is happening. So I'm going to start from my deployment repo. So since it is GitOps, all the manifests are in GitHub repository in this case. And as you can guess, there is a bunch of YAML files. And not all of them are very interesting. The service is just a service. But we have rollout.yaml. And this one I want to show you. So here is rollout. It's as promised. It's pretty much deployment, except it has different API inversion and kind. And it has a strategy. And I'm going to start from Canary. In this case, I have just two steps. First step just tells rollout controller to go ahead and replace 20% of my application with the new version, and then wait for me to say it's OK to continue. And that's pretty much it. Now we're just ready to deploy the application. And to do that, I'm going to use Argo CD. Since Intuit uses Argo CD for GitOps deployment, this is our tool of choice to do GitOps. So this particular instance has applications. I will explain later exactly what application is. And actually, I'm just going to create a new one right now. And to create an application, I have to tell Argo CD two main pieces of information. First is what I want to deploy. And that's my deployment repo. And Argo CD will scan it. It will figure out which sources of applications there are. In this case, it's a whole repo, just one customized application. And second piece is where I want to deploy it, which is my cluster. I'm going to deploy into the same cluster where Argo CD is running. I also have to tell which namespace application is supposed to be deployed into, which is Rollouts demo. I created it before the presentation. I have to give a name to my application as a reference, plus this is optional field. I can enable auto-syncing. So as you can guess, auto-syncing means automatically sync all the changes from the Git repo into the cluster. So even if I change something after the app creation, it will be immediately synced into the cluster. And that's pretty much it. We are ready to create it. Yeah, there is a project. So once application is there, is created, you can see that something starts happening. So to get more information about the application, you can just click on the app icon, and you would see all the resources which were created. So these four are ones which are defined in Git repository, and each one created some child resources. So the most interesting one is Rollout. It created replica set. Replica set created 5 pods. All of them are running. There is two pieces of information I want to highlight: the sync status and the health status. So sync status, I think you can guess what it is. If it's green, that means we have in the cluster the same thing which we want and what we committed into Git. And the second is health status. So health status is, again, self-explanatory. If it's progressing, that means your application still have a chance to be healthy. If once it is healthy, it's up and running. And let's go ahead and prove it. So this is the shortcut which Argo gives us. It's an external facing URL of an application. And now I have to kind of diverge a little bit. I just need to explain what that application is doing. It was built specifically for the demo to demonstrate the process of deployment process. So it is single-page web application. It keeps sending API queries every like few milliseconds. And each API request serves a string, which is treated as a color. And it's used to produce one of these little circles. So we're getting all the red circles continuously, which means the version of application is only serving like a red color. And great, that's it. Now we are ready to go and change something. So as a step one, usually you would make a code change, commit it, and then your pipeline would pick it up, build new version, and committed a change into your deployment repo, which I'm going to do manually. So, and of course, I already built a bunch of images before the demo. So I happens to use Customize to manage my manifests. And so I have a convenience. I can just go and change image tag in customize.yaml file. So let me change the red color into green and commit it. So, and I want to switch quickly to the Argo UI. So let me just explain what just happened. Argo noticed there was a change in repo. And the sync status switched into out of sync. And then Argo decided to fix it and immediately updated my rollout. If it took a longer time, we would notice that rollout was out of sync as well. So once rollout is updated, it inspects the spec of its own spec and decides to follow the steps of a Canary deployment. The first step was to just go ahead and get rid of 20% of previous version and start the amount of pods which are equivalent to 20% of the whole application using new version. And this has just happened. So as you can see, we have one more replica which just have a single pod, and the old replica has just 4 instead of 5. And if we switch to the application, you can see that some of the circles are now green. And this is kind of a proof that everything is working as expected successfully. And we're serving Canary traffic. And I want to highlight kind of 2 things here. One Daniel already mentioned. So it is, if you using rolling update and you want to switch to rollout, you can, as a first step, just change API version and kind. And great, you keep using rolling update, nothing happened at all. As a next step, you can decide to introduce Canary Strategy. And great, you kind of easily migrated from rolling update to Canary. And second, I did a single change in a Git, and I kind of just defined the target state. And it's very GitOps friendly because that's what you want to do. You just want to make one change, even though the process takes 2, 3, or more steps. And yeah, so what we did, we just took all of that logic and put it into controller inside of a cluster. And I promised to mention how would you automate it. So you have choices. You can either use, there is a convenience which Argo CD provides as an Argo CLI. If you don't use Argo, you can use just kubectl to kind of proceed with the
patch the rollout object.
Yeah. Yes, and okay. One thing we have not done yet is we have not completed the deployment yet. So what else is changed is the application status. It's switched from the progressing to suspended state, and this is a signal to your CI where you actually want to execute that CLI command to tell the rollout controller to continue. And as I mentioned, there is CLI. I'm going to just use UI, and I'm going to tell to Argo CD, okay, send the signal to controller, to rollout controller. And signal means just update the spec of a rollout. So once that happened, rollout starts doing its job. Yes, and we can change that. We suddenly start getting all the green traffic, which is great. That means we kind of, we slowly migrated to the next version of our application. So now we are ready to switch back to deployment. And I can demonstrate you one more kind of advantage of rollout. You can easily change your deployment strategy and switch into blue-green strategy. So let's go ahead and do it. So as you can imagine, all I have to do, just go ahead and change the deployment strategy. Yep, I'm going to use just GitHub UI to make this change. Get rid of Canary, keep blue-green. This is done. Nothing is going to happen with the application yet because we keep using the same image. And I want to change the color from green to, as you can guess, to blue. And we will be doing the truly blue-green deployment. Yep, that's so this is just done. And we are going to see exact same sequence of events. So application switched from in-sync to out-of-sync. Rollout controller decided to go ahead and execute the strategy, which is blue-green. And blue-green means create just a full copy of my production. We can see there are 2 replica sets, fully kind of scaled up to the max number of replicas. Let's make sure we're still serving green, because I have not yet approved to promote my blue to green. And I can promote it in the same way. I can just either use CLI. I mean, if you use Jenkins, this is your chance to test the blue version. And there is one more Argo CD feature which I want to demo, which is network view. It is meant to just visualize your traffic flow, and I can use it to figure out, where is my blue version. There is, on that view, I can see there are 2 external points where, which can serve the traffic. So as Danny mentioned, blue-green has preview service. In my case, it's a rollout demo preview. I can get its IP address, open it in a browser, and then I can make sure it's blue. And all my CI job can do that for me.
Testing.
Yes, test it. So it's just tested. It's really blue. And now, yeah, let's confirm the deployment using QI. It is confirmed. And so, yeah, once it is confirmed, we're going to scale down all of the green version, like green colors, and just keep blue. And as you can see, that switch happened kind of instantly because we didn't want. This is the point of blue-green deployment. And that's it. That's all I have. Thank you. Then you have a couple slides. Let me give it back to him.
So that was Argo Rollouts. And from here, we're going to talk about what's next. So we definitely want to add a service mesh integration. That announcement with the service mesh interface is definitely exciting because that will enable us to service a wide variety of service mesh providers. And it'll also enable us to do more fine-grained traffic shaping so you don't have to expose nearly as much traffic to your Canary without having to run large numbers of replicas. Additionally, probably one other thing you may have noticed is that we haven't really talked about actually analyzing the new version that we released. One of the core design principles that we had with Argo Rollouts was to really keep it focused on just the orchestration. We didn't want to introduce any analysis on into the rollout controller because we feel like that could be a separate problem that we could really solve with a separate promotion CRD. That will enable us to have more flexibility with the promotion process and integrate with a bunch of different vendors versus just having it all kind of bundled into one CRD. Finally, we are also working on adding A/B testing where we could run multiple versions at the same time so that we can really enable experimentation throughout the deployment process. So if you have any questions, please feel free to check out any of these links. The Argo Rollouts or the Argo CD web pages are a great resource. And also, if you're interested by this, please feel free to check out the Intuit careers page. We're always hiring. And yeah, with that, thank you so much for your time. And
Good time for, hello, 1, 2. Good time for a few questions.
Thanks for the demo. That's great ideas. I was wondering, would it make sense to maybe have all these ideas being merged into the deployment from Kubernetes? Like, why did you build your own way of deployment instead of going to the Kubernetes project and contribute to having this supported by them? First question. Second question, just out of curiosity, people do stupid things. What if someone have like one replica and try to make percentages? How are you dealing with this? Thanks.
Do you want to answer? Oh, okay. I think I can answer. Okay, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so one, I mean, of course, we would be happy to merge it back into Kubernetes. I guess we didn't even try to because we wanted to prove ourselves that it makes sense. And once we're stable, yes, I guess we will give it a shot and see if we can do that.
I also know that they're trying to really harden the core Kubernetes objects, and they're not as, I don't think they're as open to adding new strategies as it used to be.
It is understandable because it's opinionated. Although we try to make it as flexible as possible, it's still our opinion how flexible it should be. But yeah, I agree. It would be like beneficial for everyone to have it available in Kubernetes. And sorry, can you repeat your second question?
Second question, like people do stupid things. Sometimes they have one replica and still say, I want 20% going here. And because you are relying on adding labels to the servers, I don't think the percentage
Yes, so do you want to answer it? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Idea that this is the point of a controller. This is something we could not do in Jenkins. Controller keep watching continuously. No matter what you do, I mean, it will try to get you back into the kind of state it thinks it's supposed to be. So even if you try to delete replica set, it will recreate. If you try to scale up and controller would see, oh, that replica is not supposed to have that many number of pods, it will scale down. And you can do, interesting things. So if you're in the middle of blue-green or canary deployment and you don't like what you see, you can just go ahead and roll back. Let's say you roll back commit in Git, and controller would notice it and it will treat it in the right way. Like it would figure out that, oh, I was supposed to deploy canary, new version of a canary. I'm now supposed to run the previous version, so it would just cancel the canary and kind of go back into active state. And it was hard to do it with the script if you just have sequence of steps. That's the idea.
Thank you for a great talk and what I assume will be a very successful tool as well. Having been to earlier talks on pod readiness gates and knowing that you guys also work on Forecast, are there any plans to integrate those into the Canary release process to have automatic canary analysis and promotion throughout environments?
Do you want to answer it?
Yeah, sure. Short answer, yes. And with the promotion CRD, the plan is for us to kind of use that as the integration point with the different services so that we can kind of provide these smarter checks.
Last question.
Okay.
At the beginning, you mentioned you have 120 clusters. How does the tool work between all of them, and how does the deployment process knows which cluster to target? How does the thing work?
I think you want to answer. I think that was kind of a question about Argo CD, right? So this is it. I think so idea of Argo CD, it's a multi-cluster management tool. You can use it in two ways. You can just manage objects in the same cluster where your application is running, Argo CD is running, or you can just add credentials to an external cluster. And application has a target cluster URL and namespace. So yes, and that's why Argo is able to connect to that external cluster and do the changes. Yeah, that's the answer.
Yeah, thank you again for your time, and we'll be around for questions.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the show.